Thank you, everyone, for joining. We're just going to give folks a few more minutes to come into the room. All right, it's looking like we've got most people in now, so we'll begin this webinar. And for everyone's awareness, this is being recorded, so we will have this posted online later on for reference along with the presentation. So welcome to our webinar about safe food and fire compliance. I'm Katie Tang with the Office of Small Business, and we are here joined today with the Department of Public Health and also the Fire Department so that you all can learn more about how it is that you can safely have food and beverages at special events. And I will ask to move on to the next slide here. All right. So first off, we wanted to share a couple of new resources for you all. And one of them is that we have a new online pre-application form. This is very helpful, especially for those who haven't or perhaps don't have as much experience hosting special events in San Francisco. Eventually, we will build this out further, but for now, what it is you will indicate all the different elements of an event that you'll have in San Francisco. And what you'll get at the end is a checklist of all the different permits that you will then need to apply for. In future stages, we will roll out in this Permit SF portal additional features, such as being able to actually submit a permit application within the Permit SF system. And most importantly, right now, you'll be able to see and track where your applications are, the status with all the different departments. And you'll have everything all in one place, including messaging with city staff and asking questions and uploading attachments and so forth. So that was just recently launched. And also to pair with that, we have an information page that is sf.gov/event permits. And it's a new consolidated area where you can access information about special events, regulations, find out what permits you need. And also newly, we have information on things such as permit fees and insurance requirements, all consolidated in one place. So you don't have to Google around and find the different department websites. Also, what's new is that we have a special events team. So a team of Marianne and Lauren who are available to help you answer any questions or navigate amongst the different agencies. So you can email them at specialeventsf@sfgov.org with any questions that you have. And with that, we'll go to the next slide. So we are excited to be joined today by Kyle Chan and Aaron Wong from Department of Public Health, who will start off with the presentation, and then later we'll have Chief Mary Shea from the Fire Department to go over the fire requirements. So I'll turn it over to DPH now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kyle Chan with the Health Department. My colleague Aaron Wong is here as well. What we're trying to do is we're going to give you like a high-level kind of overview of our permitting process, and then on top of that, throw in a little bit of food safety for you guys as well. There's a lot of veteran people here that are familiar with this process, so hopefully this won't be foreign to anyone. But we're just going to go ahead and kind of walk us through it here. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so what do we define as a temporary event? So, well, I think first what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what the event sponsor or the event organizer needs to kind of do for us, and then we'll move to more specifically the individual food vendors. So for us, temporary events are defined as a community event open to the general public that is of civic, political, or educational nature, a public event that is free, or a ticket can be purchased by the general public, or an event that is advertised through media, whether that be social media, internet, TV, or the newspaper. So that is what we define as a public event and requires a temporary event permit. So a couple of limitations there. A community event cannot exceed 25 operating days within a 90-day period. And the other thing is private events that are invitation only do not require permitting for us. So that's like a wedding or a convention or a private club that has like a gathering for only members of the club. We would not require an additional permit. In addition to that, I will say that if a restaurant wants to host a party and the restaurant already has a permit with the health department, there's no additional permitting needed for that as well. Next slide. So just examples of the temporary events that we see: street fairs and festivals, musical and artistic presentations, sporting events, community celebration, trade shows and or product introductions at which food is sold or given away to the public. So for the purposes of us selling food or food being given away is the same thing. Next slide. Okay, so that is what we define as a temporary event. The next thing we want to talk about is a temporary food facility. So the actual booths that are going to be operating. So a food facility operating out of a temporary setup at a fixed location that operates in conjunction with a community event is what we define as a temporary food facility. Keep in mind that a TFF can only operate when being held in conjunction with a community event. So you can't just get a TFF permit and operate on the sidewalk or individually if it's not a part of the event itself. Next slide. Okay, so the question is, when do you know if you need a permit from SFDBH? So a permit is required for any event that is open to the public and has food and or beverages vendors setting up as a food booth. Some things that this includes are events selling or giving away food, even providing samples or drinks to the public. An event where all the food is prepackaged, or an event that has only beverages or bar services. These are all required. There are exemptions. So nonprofit organizations where 100% of the proceeds of the food or beverage sales are donated to the nonprofit organization may be exempt, and you can file for an exemption. Next slide. Okay, so steps to obtain the permit. The event sponsor must submit all applications to us at least 14 days prior to the event. And what we're looking for is, and these are all links that we can click on and we can send after the presentation as well, are the sponsor application. So the sponsor application is just all general information about the event itself, and this is to be completed by the event sponsor. Applications. So basically, each food vendor or each booth that's going to set up needs to fill out a concessionaire application. If you have an annual permit, which we will get into a little bit later, they can submit a copy of their permit as a part of their application. MFF concessionaire applications. So this has to do with any mobile food vendor or food truck vendors. It's a different application, but a lot of the same general information is completed. One thing I do want to note is that each vendor should fill out this application because it pertains directly to your operation at the event. Based on what you write on the application and we review, we determine whether you're a high risk or a low risk food facility, which, like I said, we'll talk about in a second. So the next thing is sitemap. So this is all from the event sponsor. Sitemap showing where your booth locations are set up, where restroom locations are set up. I know sometimes this is not finalized 14 days prior to the event, but the sooner we have it, the better, so we can assign inspectors. And then the last thing is just a full list of all your food trucks and your food booths. If you know that as soon as possible, that would be the best thing to submit. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the process is, once we receive all the documents and we've reviewed and approved everything, an invoice will be issued to the event sponsor for all of the food vendors. A permit is After payment is received, we email the permit to operate, and there is one permit issued for the entire event, which includes all of the food vendors. Next slide. Okay, so we did talk about high risk and low risk food vendors. Essentially, we determine you as a high risk or low risk based on what you're doing. And a high risk vendor is basically any food booth that is doing cooking, mixing, slicing, or any food preparation on site. So, yeah, basically anything that's cooking or you're doing kind of any mass food prep inside of the booth, we'd consider a high hazard. For a low hazard vendor, that's basically pre-packaged or non-perishable foods or drinks with or without sampling. This also includes bars or yeah, non-potentially hazardous foods. So based on what you write on the application, we determine what category you are, and the requirements for operation do change based on whether you're a high or low risk vendor. As far as the fees go, I think a high risk vendor right now is charged about $260 per event, and a low hazard vendor is about half of that. So it's about 132. So it's really important to write or to know what kind of operation you have on site, so we can determine the fees. The last one are the mobile food trucks, San Francisco mobile food facilities. So if you have a San Francisco permit, you are not charged any fees, but you do still need to submit an application so we know that you're going to be attending. Just a note too at the bottom, out of county food trucks. So if you have a county in another permit in another county, you can submit your application, a copy of your out of county permit, and we will charge you as either a high risk or a low risk booth, even though you don't have a San Francisco permit. Okay, next slide. So what we did talk about is there are annual permits for temporary food facility vendors, which is new this upcoming this last year. And just the difference is you can still apply for a one-time TFF permit. So this is for a single special event. You can submit the TFF application and you're charged for that specific event. Each individual event you would be charged for. The other option is the annual TFF permit, which a lot of you have, which allows you to participate in multiple events, including farmers markets, throughout the year under one annual fee. So you pay one annual fee, one online application, and then once you're approved, DPH won't charge any additional fees to the event sponsor for you to operate at that event. And this has been very helpful. I think a lot of people are taking the opportunity to apply. And a rough approximation is that it's about four times the, if you operate at four events, it's financially worth it for you to apply for the annual permit. So that's been very helpful, I think. And then in addition to that, I believe some of your fees are actually might qualify for first year free with the tax collector. So that's an additional benefit. Okay, next slide. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to have Aaron talk about food safety leading up to your event and at your event. So this is more specifically for the food vendors, but the sponsors should know this information in case they need to assist or help out. Aaron, take it away.
All right. Morning, everyone. We will try to get through this quick because we have 3.5 minutes. So cooling, big one. This is probably the most common violation that we find at temp events. And unfortunately, this is the violation that we cannot normally resolve. If someone doesn't have a hand wash station set up, we can get those supplies. If someone doesn't have sanitizer in their bucket, we can get those supplies. If someone brings adulterated, out of temp food, wasn't cooled properly from the night before, they bring it to the event and it's 80 degrees still, we have to discard that. There's some cases where you may be able to reheat it, but that's only if the food has been out of temp for 2 hours or less. Otherwise, anything that was improperly cooled will have to get discarded. So it's very important that if you are bringing over food that you're cooking the night prior or the morning of, you either keep it hot, would be your best bet, and bring it to the event the morning of the day of, or you know how to properly cool it. And there are different methods to rapidly cool certain items that we can go more in depth about. If you shoot me a separate message or email, I have a lot of documentation we can send you based on the items that you want to cook and cool at these events. Let's go to the next slide. So how are we going to help you set up your booth properly? Because sometimes we feel like we are Darth Vader when we go to your booth. So let's go to the next slide. If the booth is outdoors, it must be fully enclosed, overhead protection, usually a 10 by 10 tent. If you are cooking and preparing food inside your booth, a minimum of 2 sidewalls is required. If the floor is not concrete or asphalt and it's soil, dirt, grass, we do ask that tarps are laid down on the floor as well. Next slide. Oh, we can go to the next slide. Tarps, usually the most common thing to put down on the floor. Plywood as well. Also in the booth, if you are high hazard or if you are low hazard with some prep, hand wash stations are required. To the right are some images of equipment that is commonly used at these temp events. In addition to having clean water and something to catch the dirty water, hand soap dispenser and single-use paper towels as well. Next slide. And guys, if you have questions about any of these, just type them in, write them down. We will address all the questions at the end. Also in the booth, utensil washing stations, usually set up of 3 containers. One has soap and water, clean water, and then your sanitizer. And this is to wash any multi-use utensils, knives, cutting boards, ladles, anything that gets reused throughout the course of the event. Next slide. Sanitizer. So if you are in a restaurant, you're required to have this, no different than a restaurant. If you have a cutting board or knife that you're using throughout the day of the event, we want you to have a means to sanitize those food contact surfaces. And that may just be you wiping down the cutting board a couple times. Maybe you have to wipe your knife down. But having this in the booth is required when there are utensils being used. Quaternary ammonia and bleach are the 2 most common and most affordable options. You mix that with water, and then we will come by and test it. If you see the picture on the right, there's a little test strip that's orange and blue. That's how we know there is adequate sanitizer. Next slide. Proper hot and cold holding. That's also very important. Temperatures are very important for us. Hot holding methods, keep it at 135 or above. The common items that people use are warming units. The one pictured is a steam table. The middle picture is cold holding, generally coolers filled with ice, reefer fridges. If you have electricity at your event, people would just bring fridges and be able to plug them in. Reheating, that's a big thing. So if you've brought food cold, we do not want you reheating your food in steam tables and warming units. Those are not meant for reheating. We don't know how long and how hot those items get. So the proper ways to reheat are either on the grill, on the flat top, in a microwave, on a stove top, anything but a steam table or warming unit generally for reheating. Let's go with the next slide. You have here minimum cooking temperatures. Just to sort of touch on the last slide on reheating, when you are reheating, the food has to get to at least 165 degrees for a minimum of 15 seconds. You can go back to the next, yeah. So reheating 165. If you guys are cooking, fire will touch upon that more, but you have to cook outdoors, not underneath overhead protection. And so generally, as far as a wall goes, if you have something, um, cooking equipment in the back, we don't require a wall in that back wall to separate the cooking area and the overhead protection. Next slide. Sampling does require a hand wash station be set up if the samples are prepared on site. If you are preparing all your samples and pre-packing them offsite at the commissary or your restaurant prior, you don't need a hand wash station. But if you're cutting or breaking pieces of cookies up, putting them in little cups and distributing them, we do require a hand wash station. Sneeze guards, or at least staff monitoring the area where the samples are also required, just to prevent any risk of cross-contamination. Next slide. Waste disposal. You guys should have waste disposal at the event, but also within your booth. Same rules apply in your booth. Waste, compost, recycling. You guys should follow all those. Next slide. Restroom. So in addition to the hand wash stations that you guys have in your booth, there should be a hand wash station for the toilets, at least within 200 feet of your booth or the area where all the food facilities are. And that would be on the sponsor, and we can talk to them about that if you're having issues with that. Next slide. I think that's it. We went a little bit over our 15 minutes. Many of you guys have communicated with us before. Here's our information. And I guess we will pass it on to Fire now.
Yes, thank you very much, Chief Sherry.
Thank you. Took a little while to unmute my mic. Hi, everybody. This is Chief Mary Shea with the San Francisco Fire Department. I'm the Assistant Fire Marshal at the Bureau of Fire Prevention. Okay, next slide. We're going to talk about outdoor cooking today at events like street fair. The number one source resource we have is we have an administrative bulletin 5.10 that specifically talks about the safety requirements for regulated activities at outdoor food and street fair. You could find that on our fire department website. Our 2025 version is still on hold. We're doing some modification to make it easier for the vendors, but you can always look at the 2022 copy to get guidelines. Pretty much the guidelines are all the same. I would say 99.5%. Next slide. All vendors needs to read this administrative bulletin if they plan to cook outdoors at an event. Not only do they have to read the administrative bulletin 5.10, they also have to sign a vendor form acknowledging that they read and understand and will comply with all the guidelines. Next. So let's start with propane hoses. The number one source of fuel for cooking and warming at a street fair is propane use. That's why it's very important that we inspect the propane hoses. The propane hoses have to be approved and listed for propane use because propane is very corrosive, and it also needs to be rated at a maximum pressure of working pressure of 350 psi. These labeling needs to be visible on the hoses so that when the inspector do the inspection, there's no question you're using the right hoses. The hoses needs to be in good condition, and it needs to be long enough to provide a minimum 5 feet separation between the cooking appliance and the fuel source, which is the propane tank. Next. Propane hoses, okay, at the connections, okay, we need to make sure that the connections are tight and cannot become dislodged, and that means the clamps needs to be machine crimped and it cannot be slipped on and adjustable clamps. because vendors tend to, if there's a leak, they just keep adjusting to tighten the hose, and eventually that will not work. Next. Hoses cannot be damaged. It cannot have gouges, abrasions, grooves, and cuts. We inspect the hoses to make sure that it is safe to use. Anything such as that could obstruct the hose will make it hard to do the inspection. Like, do not put duct tape over the hoses. And when purchasing hoses, try not to buy anything that has a coating that's made of a braided coating that's made of metal or cloth, because that tends to make it really hard to determine if the hoses are the correct hoses. Next. Next. Next slide. Regulators. A regulator is required as close to the tank output as possible. It helps reduce the pressure that's coming out of the tank and also reduce the number of, reduce the pressure that's delivered to the cooking appliance. It prevents the cooking appliance from receiving too much gas. Non-adjustable regulators are not allowed because you don't know what the equipment needs and you might be providing too much pressure. On the photos here, okay, um, if you look at the photos with the two regulator that's with the green uh, uh, what's it, attachment, the top regulator is adjustable one, is not good because you can adjust the pressure. It's also not very good because if you look at the hose, it has a metal bray on it that hides the labeling. The bottom regulator is a very good regulator, is non-adjustable, and it also has a shutoff very close to the regulator. So if you include the tank shutoff, this shutoff, and the appliance shutoff, you have three ways to safely turn off the gas. Next slide. Propane cylinders, okay? Propane cylinders are designed to use upright and to be stored upright. And when you store it, you want to avoid tipping over. Even when you use it, you want to avoid it tipping over. One way to do that, very easy and very not costly, is using what we call crates, milk crates, or you can use approved tank holders. Sometimes they call tank foots. Those can be purchased at any Home Depot or Lowe's. When you have more than 3 tanks, you can group them together, what we call nesting, and tie them with a bungee cord so that they are secure against each other. Okay. Um, and also because once we've determined an appliance is safe to use, um, there should be no change out of the gases allowed. And if the event is very big and you need to change out gases, permission needs to be approved from the fire department to set up a program to change out gases and to store the spare tanks away from the cooking area. So if there's no previous approval for having extra tank on site and changing out, there shall be no spare propane tanks at the cooking or the vending areas. Next. Next slide. Okay. Cylinders needs to be in good condition. That means it should not be rusted, dented, have gouges on it, or the collar is damaged. Tanks that looks like they're very old and rusted, they might not have gone through their 10-year hydro test. So you want to make sure the tanks are, in good working condition. And wherever you set up your tank, it needs to be at least 20 feet away from any flammable liquid or combustible liquid like diesel and gasoline. Next. Okay. Leak test. Okay. Bubbles, tiny bubbles mean big trouble. Using a solution of dishwashing soap and water, and we do not use Windex because that doesn't help with leak detection, and we do not use hand washing soap. Using a dishwashing solution with water, we spray down all the connection that can be disconnected to see if there are any leaks, okay? The vendors cannot use their cooking appliance until all the leaks are fixed. And once the inspector inspects the tank, inspects the cooking equipment and the tanks that determine it is safe to use, changing out the tank is prohibited. okay? Because it requires a retest for leaks each time a connection is broken. And that's why spare tanks are not allowed at the prep and cooking areas. Next. Um, so this is just a recap. Unapproved or damaged equipment are prohibited, okay? No damaged hoses, no homemade Frankenstein grills, unapproved regulator, damaged tanks, or uh, equipment that are damaged and is leaking. Next. Okay. Open flame use. Examples of open flame use are uh, charcoal grills, wood burning ovens, or sternal for chafing dishes. Okay. Um, for for wood, for these solid fuels such as charcoal and wood, we require the vendor to bring a non-combustible container for ashes and any unused smoldering materials. Um, all these open flame grills need to be at least a minimum of 5 feet from any LP gas tanks and 5 feet from any tent. That's the cooking or prep tents. There's absolutely no open flame or cooking inside of tents or under canopies because we understand that vendors do need to keep their food warm. We do allow chafing dishes with sternals inside tents, provided that the vendor uses aluminum foil to enclose the area of the chafing dish where you can see the sternal to enclose the open flame. Okay, next. Okay. Portable generators. There are two types, gasoline or diesel. Anytime you use a portable generator, um, you must make sure that it's fully fueled because fueling on site is not allowed. If refueling needs to be done, the generator needs to be removed from the site, cool down, and then refilled. And and to use your generator, you got to be have at least a minimum of again 5 feet away from any LP gas tank or tents. And because the use of flammable and combustible liquid is a higher hazard, you would have to have a 40 BC fire extinguisher on site. Next, uh, butane cassette fuels. Okay, um, you need one that's either approved for indoor use or one that's approved for both indoor and outdoor use. In this case, for outdoor cooking, you want one that's approved for indoor use. It needs to be UL listed. The butane canister that holds the fuel and the cassette fuel needs to be from the same manufacturer. Um, these cassette fuels are considered open flame device and it is not allowed inside of tents or under canopies. And it is not allowed to be used for high volume cooking. If the cooking is high volume, the vendor should use a open flame burner instead. These cassette fuel is more for low volume cooking and warming. And the pots and pans that goes on these cassette fuels cannot be so big that the bottom of the pot or pan extends over the fuel compartment because that will start to heat the fuel canister. Okay, next. Cooking appliances. We recommend commercial appliances because all those commercial appliances, their hoses and regulators would already be in compliance. Um, you cannot modify your equipment. The equipment should not be damaged or have any missing parts, and all the shutoff knob needs to be in place. Without the shutoff knob, it's too hot to the touch to shut off, or people tend to use pliers, and that tends to damage the equipment. Um, and also, all grills needs to be approved. It cannot be Frankenstein like the chicken grill there. That's a charcoal pit that was built out of cinder blocks and metal grates. Okay, next. Okay. Cooking area setup. Each vendor needs to have a minimum 10 by 10 prep tent or canopy. No griddles allowed inside, no cooking, and no LP gas. Any kind of cooking that or warming that generates grease-laden vapor needs a hood and duct system, and that's not possible in these temporary outdoor events. Um, and you got to make sure that the cooking appliance that's set up next to these tents are at least 5 feet away, and make sure the cylinders are at least 5 feet away. For the prep area, which is the area for the cooking area, which is allowed to cook, you can have a maximum of 20 gallons of LP gas. Usually that's 4 appliances. Anything more than that, it will make it really hard to comply with the 5 feet minimum separation. Um, Cooking areas and prep tents shall not obstruct any fire lane, egress path, or exits. Okay, and also this area is not to be used to store your spare combustible, liquid, flammable, or flammable gases. Next. Okay, distance requirement. As I said in previous slides, cooking equipment and the propane cylinders, okay, needs to be 5 feet away from tents. Propane cylinders should have a minimum of 5 feet separation between the cooking appliances. So the hoses should be long enough to allow the vendor have wiggle room to set up their equipment in the cooking area to achieve this 5 feet minimum separation. And again, I emphasize cooking appliances and LP gas tanks cannot be inside of tents or under canopies. Next. Fire extinguishers. All cooking vendors need to have at least one fire extinguisher and one type of fire extinguisher and two type if they're also doing deep frying. Okay. For regular cooking, a 2A10 BC fire extinguisher with a current state fire marshal's tag is adequate. If there's any kind of deep frying, the cooking vendor needs to have a K-type fire extinguisher also. The state fire marshal's tag are required for all the fire extinguisher, and it must be current, and the extinguisher must be charged. It cannot be undercharged or overcharged. And you can check that by looking for the yellow arrow, and it needs to be in the green zone. Okay, next. Okay, SFFD regular activities. Any activities that's regulated by the fire code requires inspection and fire department permits. The regular activities include the use of propane, open flame, portable generator. Um, it also includes food truck and possibly cooking tents. For food trucks, there are 3 ways a food truck could get permitted. They can get a one-time, one-day event for just that special event, or they could get an annual renewable permit for a fixed location, such as a farmer's market, or they can get a operational permit with a tax collector license, um, as long as they every year conduct an annual inspection with the fire department and health department and notifies the fire department um, where they're going to be cooking at or which event they're going to be cooking at. There's no additional fees for that permit. For mobile food truck vendors that does a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot of, like, enough activities in San Francisco, their operational permit is recommended. Okay. Um, let's see. To use a portable generator, anytime they use a portable generator is used, if the combined generator, whether it's one generator or many, if the combined accumulative fuel capacity is over 5 gallons of gasoline or 25 gallons of diesel, a permit is required from the fire department. And all activities require inspections prior to the event. That's why the inspection is usually conducted an hour or two before the start of the event. And the fire department will not approve or issue a permit to operate if the vendors fails the inspection. Okay, next. Okay, I think that's it. And I could put my email in the chat. If anybody have any question, they can send it to me, and either I can answer it or I can ask one of the permit officer to answer. Okay, that's it.
Thank you.
16 minutes.
Thank you. Perfect,
Eh,
Chief Shea. Really want to thank DPH and Fire Department. And I've seen that DPH has already been in the chat answering a lot of the questions. I think actually all the questions have been answered. So at this point, we're going to stop the recording and get to some of the questions that are newly coming up, or if folks want to either raise their hands or put